I first heard whispers of the vanished settlement while studying old maps in a dusty library on the outskirts of a small northern town. The caretaker, a frail man with parchment-like skin and watery blue eyes, noticed me poring over archaic charts that depicted unexplored regions of the snowy wilderness. He approached, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial hush. "You're searching too far north," he said, finger trembling on a specific spot. "All that is, there is a cursed place, an old village that appears once a year and then fades again. They say you can hear the wind wailing with the voices of the dead. Best leave it alone." His warning piqued my curiosity more than it deterred me, so I pressed him for details. He only managed to choke out a name. "Frosthold," he said. It had been abandoned centuries ago. Yet pilgrims, explorers, and the foolhardy who ventured near on the night of the winter solstice reported seeing lights in empty windows and hearing low murmurs that belonged to no living soul. Many who claimed to have discovered the place described a phantom village, draped in unearthly silence. Its inhabitants nothing more than frozen husks, acting out incomprehensible, ghostly routine. Yet the caretaker had never gone himself, nor did he know anyone who had survived the experience entirely unscathed. That was enough to set my imagination aflame. Over the next weeks, I read everything I could find about Frosthold in public archives and hidden diaries. I discovered only bits and fragments of its legend. Most references recoiled from describing the place in detail, yet they agreed on one point. On the winter solstice, when the night was at its darkest and the snow at its deepest, Frosthold reappeared as if it had never gone. Citizens dead and frozen moved through the streets in a silent pantomime, reenacting their daily lives from some distant era. By dawn, the vision would fade, and the ravaged settlement vanished into swirling snows until the next solstice arrived. Some believed it was a trick of the cold or a shared hallucination. Others insisted that a curse had yoked the villagers to a wretched half-life. I marked the date of the upcoming solstice in my journal and prepared a lone journey into this ominous territory. It was foolhardy, but every hair on my neck prickled at the thought that, for one night, I could witness something few living souls had truly seen. My heart roared with both dread and a scholarly lust for discovery. On the morning I set out, the sky was a bleak canvas of steel-gray cloud. My guide into the area was a grizzled trapper named Soren, a taciturn man with scars across his knuckles and a weariness in his eyes. He escorted me past skeletal pine forests and across frozen streams until, at last, he refused to continue any farther. He pointed a shaking hand toward a glacial valley below. "That's the place, or close enough," he said, gathering his fur collar tight around his throat. "If you step foot in Frosthold, don't return blaming me for your fate." He then turned and left me at once, striding briskly into the white haze, as if trying to outrun his own fear. Alone, I descended into the valley where snowdrifts rose to my knees. The cold was more biting than I'd ever felt, and my breath crystallized on my scarf. The entire world felt muffled, as though nature was holding its breath. Part of me wanted to call out to see if my own voice would echo back, but something kept me silent. The hush was nearly sacred. At twilight, the first signs of the uncanny village emerged. I glimpsed a pitch-black silhouette of wooden roofs, like a mirage on the horizon. Darkness fell rapidly, and I lit my lantern. As I drew closer, I noticed soft blue lights shimmering in windows that had no right to be lit in a derelict ghost town. The buildings themselves looked half-rotten, yet there was movement, a faint flickering behind frosted panes, as though pewter shadows passed by inside. My heart galloped as I approached. I skirted the boundary of what might have been a main road, though heavy snow concealed any path. Then I caught sight of the first inhabitant. My lantern's glow revealed the rigid shape of a woman dressed in garments from a bygone era, layers of coarse wool and a fur-lined hood. She stood on a stoop, hand on a doorframe, her eyes blank and an unnatural pallor to her cheeks. Yet she moved. Slowly, mechanically, she reached for the latch, turned it, and vanished inside. The door swung closed behind her without sound. My stomach clenched. It had been no vision. I had truly seen a body in motion, a corpse given a dreadful semblance of life. The encounter urged me to step more carefully. I continued along the perimeter of the houses until I found a sign hammered into the fence of what might have been a merchant's shop. The letters, scoured by time and ice, barely read. Rune and Sons General. Hardly daring to believe my eyes, I glanced through the window. The glass was rimed with frost, but I spotted the silhouettes of two people inside. One stood behind a wooden counter. The other rummaged among shelves. As if enacting an ordinary sale, the customer set down items on the counter, and the merchant slid across what must have been money in exchange. It was all done in utter silence. Then I saw their faces. Both had ghastly white, frost-bitten flesh. Their eyes looked frozen open, or perhaps those orbs were just ice that glimmered with a pale reflection of my lantern. They continued their pantomime, unheeding of my presence. My stomach churned, yet part of me couldn't resist a closer look. I cracked open the door and stepped inside. An icy gust hit my cheeks. I expected them to turn and stare, but neither of them acknowledged me. Instead, the scene continued, as if I were invisible. The hush was uncanny, broken only by the distant creak of wood. That's when I noticed something strange embedded in the thick layer of frost along the walls. Shapes that might have been tendrils, swirling patterns, or wrinkled lines, as though an otherworldly fungus had latched on. It seemed to pulse with faint luminescence, a living pattern of dark veins that cast an eerie glow across the counters and shelves. The merchant reached out woodenly to finalize what resembled a handshake with the customer, but as soon as their hands touched, a faint swirl of brittle snow flaked off their sleeves, as though their limbs had cracked with the slight movement. Yet they did not react. They continued their ghostly transaction, locked into the same daily routine that must have occurred centuries ago. I left the shop in a daze and ventured deeper into the crooked row of snow-laden buildings. If I let my mind wander from the horror of it all, I could almost imagine the village as it once was, complete with humble daily bustle and the clamor of talk around corners. Only here, no sound reached my ears. Each building I passed seemed embroiled in a tableau of half-living figures, all with that same lifeless gaze, steadfastly repeating tasks from a long-dead era. I crept between two narrow houses along a path choked with icicles. In the faint aura of my lantern, a man trudged past, arms laden with a block of ice that might once have been firewood. He seemed oblivious to the cold, or to the fact that there was no longer a need for his chore. It struck me viciously that, despite their mechanical semblance of normalcy, these villagers must be suffering some unimaginable, repetitive torment. Something was keeping them anchored here, replaying their final day, or perhaps an ordinary day from the village's history, in an endless loop. I recalled scraps of rumor that the townspeople refused to worship the local forest spirits, or had scorned some ancient deity associated with the freezing north. Legends hinted that the entire population had been cursed in a single night of punishing blizzard, black magic, and tortured screams. Their souls were trapped, tethered to the frost that had claimed them. Now, once every year, they reenacted that dreadful existence until the dawn forced them into oblivion once more. Above the eerie stillness, the wind rose in a mournful moan, as if noticing my presence at last. A swirl of snow fell from rooftops. Despite my trembling limbs, I forced myself on, lantern raised, scanning for any structure that might hold records or diaries to confirm the story. My eyes fell upon what appeared to be an official building, perhaps a meeting hall or chapel. The entrance was flanked by tall wooden columns, each carved with cryptic runes. Its door was unbarred. I stepped inside. The interior, illuminated by a faint glow from my lantern, revealed rows of pews or benches. At the far end, a dais with some kind of altar. A cluster of forms in archaic clothing knelt there, each motionless except for stiff bows of the head in unison, as though locked in a prayer or ritual. I moved forward, my boots crunching through patches of brittle snow. The worshippers' faces were shrouded by hoods, but I could see fingers twisted into shapes of supplication, their joints frozen in place. Suddenly, all at once, those kneeling figures turned their faces in my direction. My heart jumped into my throat. Their eyes were as dead as the others, but an unsettling awareness emanated from them, as though some primal force behind the icy stairs recognized an intruder. The group resumed their silent bows, but in a more frenzied, repetitive way, as if hastening to complete a last entreaty to whatever being they once worshipped. I tried stepping backward, wanting to leave, but my curiosity locked my feet in place. I inched to the altar, raising my lantern. Patterns of swirling frost marred the surface, forming intricate arcs around a stone symbol that looked like a spiked wheel. As I watched, the marks in the ice appeared to shift, the lines slithering like serpents. It was as if the curse itself was inscribed into the structure. I heard a dull scraping sound behind me. Turning with a gasp, I saw one of the worshippers slump forward, arms still raised in a grotesque posture, then crash to the floor. Frost fractured across the body, like brittle porcelain. For a split second, I saw the hollow emptiness within. No blood, no flesh, only ice and darkness. The corpse shattered into shards with a dull crash, then lay still amongst broken fragments. A hush fell again upon the hall. The others continued to bow, ignoring their companion's destruction, as though it were inconsequential. A wave of terror washed over me. It was a stark reminder. Whatever force revived these people each winter solstice did so in defiance of nature. They were as fragile as glass and as unknowing as automatons. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I still had the insane notion there might be something to learn here, some record or object that could explain the tragedy. Steeling myself, I scoured the altar, brushing aside brittle frost flakes. There, half hidden behind the stone symbol, I found a small box covered in swirling etchings, suspiciously similar to the runes outside. Despite my dread, I grasped it. Opening the box revealed a single item, a bound set of faded parchment pages. They were brittle, the edges crumbling at the slightest touch. By lantern light, I struggled to read the archaic handwriting. Night terror. It has come. The unholy winter. Our offerings were spurned, our prayers not heard. Some presence in the wind demands a different sacrifice. Night after night, the frost claims more of our flesh. I hear the voices outside calling us to let them in, but we cannot open the doors. The ritual must be completed, or else we are lost. One by one, people have begun wandering the streets in a trance, forging a path of disquiet. They are not themselves anymore. The text dissolved into smudged ink, unreadable. My mind reeled. Something monstrous had descended upon Frosthold, punishing them for some breach of faith. Yet no known deity or spirit I'd heard of reveled in freezing entire towns alive. What manner of being demanded such agony? I pocketed the journal gingerly. There was no further reason to linger in that altar hall. Outside, the wind had grown savage, whipping flurries of snow across the deserted streets. Now, the entire village was awash in that same writhing pattern along the walls, windows, and doors. Dark tendrils of ice pulsated with faint luminescence, as if feeding on the negative energy or fear saturating the place. I trudged through the drifts, searching for a path that might lead me away from Frosthold. I wanted nothing more than to flee, but the labyrinth of houses confounded my sense of direction. Doors opened, revealing more blank-eyed figures stepping out into the dark. They looked skyward, mouths agape in silent, desperate pleas. Then they continued going about their phantom tasks, oblivious to me. I thought I glimpsed what looked like an old stable or barn near the edge of town. Its pitched roof soared above the other buildings, and I figured it might grant me a vantage point. As I neared, Two men, both stiff and encased in hoarfrost, hauled what looked like a horse drawn on a sled, though the poor creature was just as frozen as they were. The entire scene was surreal, as though time had rewound centuries to this final night of horror. I skirted around to the barn's side entrance. Inside it was dark except for a faint glow from overhead rafters thick with ice. Strange lumps were scattered on the floor, and as my lantern's beam swept over them, I realized these lumps were the frozen remains of animals. Cows, goats, the horse I'd seen outside. Another figure, a stable hand by the look of his archaic clothing, was brushing the flank of a rigid, lifeless bull. The bull's eyes shone like marbles, unblinking, frosted over. Still, the stable hand moved the brush in stiff arcs. I stifled a groan of horror. Shaking, I climbed a narrow ladder to the upper loft. My plan was to find a window or hatch that might show me the boundaries of the town. Instead, I discovered more forms pressed along the walls, swathed in tattered blankets. Possibly they were families who had tried to shelter themselves from the cold on that fateful night. A woman cradled a child to her breast. I approached carefully, half expecting them to stir, but they were eternally locked in that posture of fear and heartbreak. My breath caught in my throat. I had no business intruding here. Carefully, I found a small window and peered out. In the distance, I noticed a dark outline of pines, a sign that the village's edge was close. My escape lay there. I clambered down the ladder. The stable hand remained at his insidious brushing. Keeping my lantern low, I slipped outside. The cold assaulted me anew, and the wind howled like a doleful spirit. Every creak of wood and swirl of snow made me tense, as though unseen watchers hovered behind me. From the corner of my eye, I spotted other villagers converging, their eyes lifted to the black sky. Then I saw the moon above, a silver disk. It was nearing its zenith. I realized that midnight and the solstice had nearly arrived. That was the apex of the dark power saturating the place. If the rumors were correct, the entire settlement might vanish at dawn, and I wasn't sure if I would vanish with it. I started toward the tree line, my boots crunching over ice-laden ground. Passing a row of half-toppled cottages, I sensed movement behind me. Keeping my composure, I glanced back to see a figure that could only be described as the remnants of an official or elder. He wore a fur-trimmed robe and a chain that might have been a symbol of authority. His face was a nightmare. The skin was sunken, stretched taut over a frozen skull, and the eyes were long-gone sockets. Yet he walked with purposeful steps, arms extended, as though reaching for me. I stared in shock as he approached, a silent maw gaping in what might have been an attempt to speak. His limbs jerked like a marionette. Then, behind him, I saw a crowd gathering, men and women alike. Their blank gazes turned on me. For the first time, I felt singled out in this realm of the undead. My heart thundered. I had to run, but something made me linger a fraction of a second. The elder's arms were outstretched in a gesture almost like pleading rather than hostility. His lips parted, releasing a faint hiss that, in the hush of the night, reached my ears as a single word, "Help." It was barely audible, a rasp carried on the wind, but it froze my blood. In that moment, I understood. Though locked in their eternal reenactment, some shred of their souls remained, suffering every moment. Observing me for the first time, they yearned for release. Perhaps the living warmth of my flesh reminded them of what they had lost, life and freedom. My horror warred with pity, but reason told me I could not break this curse by mortal means. Fear overcame sympathy. I stepped backward, trembling, then turned and fled. The moan of the villagers swelled, as if they tried to call after me, but the wind whipped their voices into a shriek. I stumbled through the snow, past broken fences, ignoring the possibility of pursuit. I couldn't bear the notion of them trying to follow me, frozen arms outstretched, hungry for deliverance, or, worse yet, for a warmth they might devour. I could not slow my pace, for it felt as though the entire village had awakened to my presence. At last, I reached the outskirts. The twisted sign that read Frostrold was half buried, coated in filaments of swirling frost. Beyond it, the trees swayed, a dark sentinel forest bending in the storm. My lungs burned. I pressed forward, weaving between pines whose branches formed a tunnel overhead. The howling gusts lessened, giving way to a dull quiet as I reached a summit. Against the moonlight, I glimpsed a valley below. The village was there, lit by an otherworldly pallor. I watched as faint shapes moved across the snow, drifting in silent repetition. Unable to look any longer, I continued until my legs gave out. Leaning against an ancient pine, I stared at the sky. Clouds gathered, blotting out the moon, and snow drifted around me in a soft swirl. Dawn could not be far. I forced myself to take steady breaths, counting the heartbeats that hammered in my skull. Slowly, the darkness behind the trees seemed to recede, and a pallid light bled into the wintry horizon. The dawn of the solstice day arrived, swirling with a faint golden hue. With it came a profound hush, as though nature itself paused to witness this cursed place. When the first rays of sunlight broke across the valley, I squinted, searching for the row of rooftops. To my astonishment, the silhouettes of Frostholda collapsed into the snow, as if they had never been real. The entire settlement blurred, the shapes folding in on themselves, dissolving into drifting snow, leaving behind only blank whiteness. The hush lingered. I couldn't even see the footprints of the villagers. It was as if the entire village had returned to wherever it hid for the rest of the year, living out its cyclical torment. Exhaustion sluiced over my body like a wave, but I forced myself onward, following distant landmarks Saren had shown me. I knew I had to make it to safety before another storm trapped me. My thoughts spun around the horror I'd just witnessed, the sorrow etched in the villagers' expressions, and the single haunted whisper, "Help." By the afternoon, I stumbled into a trading post at the forest's edge, half frozen and delirious. A group of traders and trappers huddled around a fire rushed forward to aid me. They offered warm blankets and cups of broth. Their eyes brimmed with concern, but they also bore the hardened skepticism of men who'd heard tall tales before. Still, when I pulled out the diary pages and showed them the cryptic text, their hands shook. One older man looked at me with the measurable sorrow of someone who knew the story's truth but never dared go there himself. He said nothing but gave a solemn nod, as if acknowledging I had encountered something that defied all reason. Word of my experience spread among the outpost. Whispers abounded of the cursed hamlet, reappearing to torment its denizens each solstice. Some people demanded to see the diary, to glean the cause of its doom, but I kept it close. Others insisted no mortal should ever attempt to break such a curse, for it belonged to forces beyond human grasp. A few, brimming with restless courage or curiosity, argued that a second expedition might be launched, that we might bring priests or shamans to banish the evil that kept Frostholda in thrall. I said nothing. The memory of those hollow eyes weighed on me. Eventually, I ceased discussing the village. My nightmares were enough. I saw them every time I shut my eyes, the merchant exchanging coins with a frozen customer, the stable hand pushing a brush across a dead animal's flank, the robed elder's mouth opening in a deathly moan, desperate and pleading. Help! The word loops in my mind like a broken record, haunting me more than any confession of guilt. I remained at the outpost for a full week, allowing my frostbitten fingers to heal and my mind to settle. I told myself I'd done all I could. What power does a single traveler possess against a doom centuries in the making? No answer satisfied me, but I managed to push it aside. When I was well enough, I headed back south, determined never to set foot near Frosthold again. Yet, as I sit by the glow of a tavern hearth, I can't escape the knowledge that, in a year's time, on the next solstice, the snows will recede to reveal them once more. The villagers will awaken, locked again in their looping semblance of life, each breath stolen by cold and each fragment of time a torment. Sometimes I wake in the lonely hour before dawn, trembling with an unshakable thought. Perhaps the elder's desperate plea was more than a single victim's cry. Perhaps it was the voice of the entire village, or the echo of the deep power that trapped them, mocking me for my powerlessness. And each new solstice, the call will come again, ringing like a hollow wail in the frozen wind, echoing across the silent snow, again and again. Help! It is a lament. None respond to a summons from the frozen tongues of the damned. Yet I alone witnessed their sorrow. I alone bear the knowledge that, with the turning of the year, Frostholder's cruel drama will resume. And until some force greater than mortal comprehension can lift the ancient curse, they are doomed to remain, awaiting a salvation that may never come. In their final moments each year, when the frost reclaims the streets and the dawn approaches, I can almost imagine them crying out in silent unison, grasping for deliverance. Then, as quickly as they arise, they vanish once more into the cold, endless realms of memory. In the oldest northern legends, no gods or spirits are said to weep for Frostholded. Perhaps its people turned from every offered grace and are now beyond redemption. Or perhaps the curse afflicting them is no more than a cosmic accident, a collision of dark magic and merciless winter. Whichever the cause, their lonely silhouettes shall continue to wander in that valley, stirring on the bleakest night of the year, frozen corpses, locked in a mockery of life, forever bound to the living ice